Of all the powerful entities that make up the ruling class of Hell, few come close to the incredible power of Beelzebub. The Lord of Gluttony has had probably the biggest impact of any singular demonic being on the entire Carcass front, and further afield into Europe, Northern Africa, the Middle East, and perhaps even the rest of the world. He is also the Prince of Hell who has managed to grow his power the most during the unholy war against the tyrant god Yahweh. When the gates of Inferno were first opened, disgusting pit locusts poured out into the world, followed by ragtag bands representing various entities in the court of the seven-headed serpent. Beelzebub saved his strength, sending forth nothing but his humble flies. Acting as spies and carriers of disease, he sent them forth to watch not just the realm of mortal man, but also the forces of his fellow demons and archprinces. Despite being powerful enough to claim the throne of gluttony in the court of the seven-headed serpent for himself, Beelzebub didn't care to play such games, and left it up to lesser demons, whom he mockingly referred to as the puppet princes, to lay claim to it. Everyone knew that whomever sat in the throne was not the true representative of gluttony, and in a masterstroke, Beelzebub hampered the power of the court, as votes on major matters of the war would often stalemate at 3 votes aside, the other court members refusing to give whomever sat the throne of gluttony a vote in the most important matters, as they all knew that only Beelzebub could really speak for gluttony and were happy to use the fact to increase their own power on the court. This has led to a consistent undermining of the organisation and cooperation of the forces of Hell, as Beelzebub has both denied them the most powerful fighting force that they could muster and the ability to agree on much of anything. He does this for one simple reason. As the Lord of Gluttony, he means to infect as many living creatures as possible with his most terrible plague. Everyone is aware that Beelzebub has no plans to share the spoils of Earth with his fellow princes, and he intends to make himself the most powerful being in Lucifer's domain, through the opened gates of Inferno. Rumour in the hellish city of Dis says that the glutton has his eyes on Lucifer's very throne, although others argue that this was a lie started by Mammon to undermine his rival's place in hell. Regardless of his long-term ambition, his aim in the Trench Crusade is simple: to spread the Black Grail as far as possible. It is for this reason that Beelzebub held back his strength in the initial assaults of 1099, measured the resolve of his foe, and then went to work, testing strains of his sickly diseases. In 1346, Beelzebub was finally ready to act, and he unleashed the Black Grail upon the earth. Tens of millions were infected as flies, spiders, scorpions, and every other creature capable of carrying the virus poured forth from hell. It was the single biggest attack ever suffered by human forces, precisely because they were so unready for the nature of the assault. Defensive lines all across the Levant fell, as it was impossible to properly defend when the person fighting beside you first grew too ill to fight, and then became your enemy. All around the Levant and further afield, entire towns, villages and cities succumbed to the plague, the vile pus and leaking fluids carrying the Grail everywhere, infecting man and beast alike. Beelzebub may be gluttonous, but he is not impatient, and is one of the few creatures in hell that seems to have managed to overcome his baser nature, making him a treacherous enemy to the forces of God. Through a stayed hand and a clever plan, the forces of Beelzebub swept the already weakened Levant, infecting everything they could with the Black Grail, killing the rest, and pushing their enemies all the way back to New Antioch and the Iron Wall, both of which struggled to contain the sheer volume of infected enemies that marched against them. It is said that the cannons of the Iron Wall and the shrine anchorites of St. Methodius at New Antioch never stopped firing, lighting the night sky for 400 days and 400 nights. Once the initial assault had been broken, the Levant remained an active war zone for 7 years as the world poured resources and soldiers into it to stem the tide. This allowed Beelzebub to take what many have thought to be his true prize in the first assault, a city that had once whispered his name, built on the land where the earliest men had given rise to his initial forms, wasting diseases moving between nomadic tribes who had no way to comprehend what was happening to them. The city of Ekron now belonged to Beelzebub, and in the near 7 centuries since, has never fallen back under the control of man. The forces of Beelzebub have built high walls and fierce defences, and inside the population boils and burns in a ravenous plague that never relents. While diseases such as typhus, malaria, typhoid, smallpox, yellow fever, and 100 others all feed back to the demon lord of flies, his most wondrous and virulent work is the Black Grail and its many strains. This terrifying disease can take over the host, filling their body with pus, tearing their skin with sores. The infected see visions of hell, and are driven to do the bidding of Beelzebub. There are always differences between the strains, with even one having been known to infect the dead, turning them into shambling bubonic corpses. While the ebb and flow of hell's politics means that he cannot always use the gates with the freedom he wishes, Beelzebub sends forth his swarms when he can, millions of flies forming clouds of violently buzzing darkness that sweep across the land. They will infect everything they can, often carrying multiple strains of the Black Grail to see which one infects the fastest, spreads the furthest, and has the most devastating impact on victims. Beelzebub, the greedy tactician, seeks to learn as much as possible while the strains survive, always seeking to improve his minions and slowly wither away his foes. When he cannot launch his strains directly from hell, he is happy to experiment with earth-formed strains from secret compounds, such as Ekron itself and other Black Grail strongholds, although these strains never match the power and ferocity of the Hellborn variants. Through his ongoing experiments at Ekron, he hopes to someday match the incredible Black Grail mutations of Hell, removing his reliance on control of the gates to stage true invasions against the forces of man. Like all the princes, Beelzebub has access to a range of forces to pick from when sending forth his warbands and armies. Some are as old as mankind itself, while others have been developed or perfected over the course of the war. All of them share the same spark of humanity that the forces of Hell rely on to be able to wage the war without breaking the Covenant, for nothing of true demonic origin could cross the threshold of Hell without invoking the direct intervention of Heaven. Hounds of the Black Grail are the disgusting, still animated carcasses of dogs that have been mutated beyond recognition by infection. Beneath the patchy and broken skin rides an army of maggots and flies birthed by Beelzebub himself. They carry all manner of disease, often hunting in packs, aiming to infect as much of the remaining human presence in the no man's land as possible. Hounds also make for useful infiltrators, and groups of them have been known to ravage southern Europe and North Africa, sometimes growing up to 1,000 strong before descending on a helpless town and devouring everything they can find. While everything of their normal physiology has been burned away by disease, the unholy power of Beelzebub that keeps them animate also imbues them with incredible toughness and terrifying speed. Most people infected with the Black Grail cannot withstand the power of such blessing, and unable to manifest the vision that Beelzebub has for them, they face the ignominious end of becoming a thrall. Other than vague physical similarities, thralls contain nothing of the humans that they were formed from, and are merely empty, mindless husks that know nothing more than the ceaseless ambitions of their master. They gather together in great swarms, slaves to the direction and instruction of the Lord of the Legion of the Flies. Some will be taken over by giant hellflies as they bury their proboscis deep into their spinal columns. Thralls are easily dealt with on their own, should a human be able to overcome the horror of what they are facing, but in groups, as they all clamour to tear the flesh of their victims, spewing pus and rot all over them, they become a threat to any creature, no matter how skilled. The Heralds of Beelzebub are those who reacted the best to the hellflies, and instead of simply being controlled by them, their bodies are melded with them, their flesh as malleable as putty under the effect of the Black Grail and Beelzebub's power. Still living, they feel every bit of the pain endured as the hellfly sinks deep into their flesh, breaking apart and infecting them like a parasite. The blood from the hellfly spreads to every part of them, and their body bloats in sickening fashion, filling with ichor and waste fluids. Their heads become misshapen, their eyes taking on the huge black bulbous nature of a fly's. their face extending outward and growing a proboscis of its own. Wings sprout from their back, and the rest of their misshapen body shrivels beneath them into two stubby and tormented legs. With the fly firmly in control, the remaining human is still cursed by consciousness and can feel its own twisted and disgusting form being slowly eaten away from within as they are forced to fight against everything they once held dear. The Amalgam is one of the most potent tragedies of the Trench Crusade, where there is human flesh, and with a Black Grail virus boiling nearby, hidden and secret infections can spread through the living or the dying. From mass graves where the newly dead have been buried, to trenches filled with the casualties of war who still bravely try to fight, or the field hospitals that desperately attempt to save anyone they can, the Black Grail can work its sickly art, sewing together those who are infected or barely cling to life, tying their bodies together into shambling hulks known as the Amalgams. The nature of the Amalgams make them incredibly tough to defeat, and they can absorb damage from conventional weapons with little issue, stamping and smashing their enemies underfoot and wielding an array of weapons in their many arms. The record keepers of New Antioch have recorded instances of entire squads succumbing to the Black Grail and forming together into amalgamations, roaming the no man's land and slaughtering their former comrades before being brought down. An amalgam is impossible to stop with conventional weapons, as even high explosives can do damage only to some parts of its corpulent mass, which are simply discarded, revealing new layers that make up the innards of the amalgam, with new screaming faces emerging from beneath the bulbous layers of fat, muscle and bone. The huge mass of this monstrosity makes it impossible to pin down by mere humans, as it brushes aside even the mightiest champions of the church like chaff in a foul wind. Only the strongest human devotees can survive the compounding blessings of the Black Grail. The ones that do are inducted into the ranks of the Corpse Guard, bodyguards to the nobility of the Black Grail. If they serve with distinction, they may one day join the ranks of the infernal nobility themselves. Before that, there is likely to be a millennia of combat in the never-ending wars within Hell or on Earth against the forces of mankind. Corpse Guards are truly unique amongst those infected with the Grail, with subjects who have the devotion and strength to endure the horrific effects of the sickness, coming together with Beelzebub's greatest works to form a symbiotic relationship. Where usually there is subjugation and rot, the Grail instead promotes healing, increased reflexes, and clarity of thought. The Corpse Guard becomes the ideal protector, bound via ironclad oath to protect their wards. The Corpse Guard is willing to step between their charge and any danger, absorbing and shrugging off damage that would surely fell their masters. When the tides of the Black Grail come, many mortals cry out to Beelzebub in their despair, hoping that the Lord of Flies will spare them in exchange for worship and servitude. Many would even offer their very souls of their families, as if they were theirs to bargain with, as the harsh and brutal reality of the suffering endured by those possessed with the Black Grail can weaken even the strongest soul. But their cries fall on deaf ears, for the Prince of Gehenna hates all creation, and only wishes to warp it into a form pleasing to him and hateful to God. But there are few mortals, though exceedingly rare, who truly share the vision of Beelzebub and wish the world to end in a putrid parasite-infested mass, eternally writhing in the throes of the endless plague bestowed upon them. Many of them are secret and highly skilled killers, men and women whose pleasure is to murder repeatedly, plying their craft in secret, wishing one day to do it openly. Many will have adopted lifestyles that facilitate their heinous crimes. Wandering merchants or tradesmen have reason to move from town to town, coincidentally leaving misfortune in their wake as people go missing or meet with unfortunate ends. Others will seek employment as the guards or sheriffs of particularly loathsome nobles, especially those known for their own cruelty and who are likely to turn a blind eye to heavy-handed or even fatal tactics from their men-at-arms. Others become brigands and bandits or corsairs and pirates, eager for the chance to slaughter innocent travellers. From amongst such twisted individuals are inducted into the ranks of the unholy order of the Fly, known as Plague Knights. When the Black Grail comes, they come out calmly and welcome the wave of corruption, and they're not consumed by it, but rather warped into a cadaver-like creature halfway between life and death. They retain their sentience, intelligence, and even a dim memory of their past lives, making them extremely useful at leading the Black Grail into the isolated farmsteads and remote settlements that might otherwise escape the clutches of Beelzebub. The more living creatures a Plague Knight can find and warp beyond recognition, the higher they will climb in the ranks of the Order of the Fly, and the greater the favour they will find in the eyes of Beelzebub. Amongst their rank there are 12 Plague Knights of great renown, made in mockery of the paladins of the Church as great champions of the Fly. They dwell within Ekron, the city of Beelzebub, a place of such wilting horror that none dare to approach it, not even the mightiest of heretic lords. But sometimes the orders of their lord come to their ears, and then the mightiest of Plague Knights strike forth, following orders carried out by the deafening buzz of trillions of beating wings of hellflies. The Lords of Tumors are high-ranking noble officiants in the cult of the Black Grail, spreading filth and corruption amongst friend and foe alike. They commune with the Lord of Flies through a trance-like ecstasy, and can channel the very power of the Seventh Circuit of Hell which Beelzebub rules. These great hulking beasts consist of tumours, cancers, pus-filled sacs and demonic muscles, stretched and pulled over the elongated and distended form of things that were once human. Having shown tremendous aptitude for combat, leadership, and spreading the plague over many centuries and millennia, they have been rewarded with golden armours that befit their station. The Lord of Tumors is capable of infecting even the toughest and most hardy of enemies with a single touch, and there are constant wars between them as they attempt to infect opposing lords' Grail strains with their own. This would allow them to control the troops of thralls of political rivals, and also grow the size of their own hordes. All Lords of Tumors have a singular dream, to someday amass so much power that Beelzebub blesses them with new strength and a new purpose. They long to lead the hegemonic incursions, walking across the earth as something akin to a god, leading an army of billions as they lay waste to everything they can find. In the annals of the Great War, there have, so far, been just two mighty hegemons of the Black Grail, Ursina Rex, Emperor of Pestilence, and Febris, the rotting bride of Beelzebub. Each of them was destroyed, but at an unimaginable cost to the forces of the great tyrant Yahweh. Even the great paladin Engalir, the Sword of Heaven, died confronting the might of a hegemon. With the ascension of a hegemon, the hideous power of the Black Grail is exalted. Beelzebub grows sleek and fat, and like a magnanimous king, bestows blessings and gifts upon his most favoured children. Beelzebub's insidious grip over his Grail thralls greatly increases. They move with more grace, and the exalted blessings of the Grail opens their ruined minds, allowing them to truly witness the rotting glory of the Lord of Flies, and enabling them to understand more complex weaponry. In turn, the nobles that makes up the ranks of the Order of the Fly are given kingly gifts from their mighty liege. Full of the ascendant power of the Black Grail, how miserable they become when their hegemon lords fall in battle. Each hegemon is unique, and when slain, it can never be recreated. The ecstasy of the Plague Knights in the service of their dread ruler sinks into a deepest despair from which there is no escape. Their strain of the Black Grail is shunned by others of their kind, and they are no longer welcome at Ekron, the city of Beelzebub. They are cast out from the Order of the Fly for their failure. The hegemon's strain of disease continues spreading and creating thralls, but they are born into a world bereft of their sires, leaving them hopeless and desolated. The eyes of the Plague Knights continuously weep cold black blood as they cry for their lost dark paradise that will never be again. The tantalizing dream of a great flood of pestilence that cleanses the earth is lost to them forever. Their mournful wails echo and reverberate throughout no man's land, a cry of sorrow deeper than any mortal can feel, and an agonizing rage of black hatred that no mortal can comprehend. They compose mournful paeans to their lost hegemon, beautiful yet disturbing songs that promise nothing but never-ending death. Such shattered remains of the once mighty legions of the hegemon take their vengeance on any opponent, regardless of their allegiance, even throwing themselves at other Black Grail warbands in futile acts of regret. trying to feel pain that would at least momentarily dull their aching feeling of loss. But no such hope exists in their eternal damnation. These bands, made up of the strains of fallen hedgemans, once mighty legions, form everlasting funeral processions for their dead masters. The echo of their cries and dirges accompanies their solemn steps, taking them from nowhere to nowhere. Their eyes are forever stained by the foul tears of the Black Grail, and their skin turns black and sloughs off, hanging in tatters like funeral garb. They seek lost artifacts and broken shards of armour, and weapons of their lost liege, and fashion disturbing and rusted jewellery from those remains where the hegemon's power still lingers beyond the grave. Few things that haunt the no man's land are more dangerous, or even more ghastly than these corruption-ridden echoes of the dark past, and the funeral processions that last until time itself is no more.